Greetings and welcome to the Fall 2022 Calgary Grace Conference. I am Vic Dobrennan. One of my things on my to-do list before I get too old is I would like to learn how to speak extemporaneously on Bible topics. Ha ha ha. The meaning of extemporaneously is to speak without preparation. Well, I'm not there yet, so I'm going to cheat and read what I want to say. That way I know at least I won't screw up what I want to say. It's one of the tragedies of the world that the gospel has largely been hidden from mankind for 2,000 years. We could have avoided so much misery and would have advanced so much quicker as humans if the gospel had been preached sooner by more people, especially preachers. I know it sounds audacious to make such a comment, but once you understand the gospel, you know that it is a true statement. It's sad to say that Christianity can only be given a 3 or 4 out of 10 in preaching the gospel. Christianity specializes in works, and works can only ever make you self-righteous. Christianity can be given a 10 out of 10 in promoting self-righteousness. Therein lies the tragedy. The gospel is good news. It's not conditional good news, it's good news, period. It's not just good news for those who believe, it is also for those who specifically don't believe. That's why it's good news. If it's not good news for everybody, it isn't good news for anybody. What Jesus did, he was 100% successful in accomplishing. Michael and Daniel have come up with a wide stream of excellent thoughts over the past year. Basically, the preceding is distilled from their excellent preaching. Here's another of those good thoughts. The gospel does not do anything for you. Whoa, you say, what? No, it does not do anything for you. What it did 2,000 years ago. You were born into this. Every human being born after the cross was born into freedom and liberty, or as the Bible says, holy, righteous, and perfect before God. During this weekend, you're not going to learn some rules to follow. You're not going to be made to feel guilty and repent of something. You're not going to be asked to repeat some prayer. You're not even going to be asked to believe something. The gospel is strictly information of an event that took place 2,000 years ago, but that affects every human being born since that time, and all human beings who have ever existed. It's called freedom. It's called liberty. It's called perfection in God's view and opinion of you, no matter your actions and deeds in life. You are God in the earth. What you're going to be encouraged to do, though, is to receive the gospel. The Greek word for the Greek word for receive is lambano. Mike and Daniel spent 6 or 7 meetings on lambano. You have to lambano the gospel. In other words, embrace it as something that is yours, because it is. Another thought that has come out of the podcast that helps our understanding is that a lot of what is written in the New Testament affected people that were on both sides of this reality. For example, Paul and the apostles, Peter, James, and John, were alive when Jesus died and rose again. They therefore wrote their letters with a dual perspective. It is important to understand this context when reading the New Testament. It will clear up a lot of confusion. Another important point to keep in mind is not to believe everything Jesus said in the red letters of your Bible as pertaining to you today. Oh my God, you say, now I know that you guys are heretics. Well, keep in mind the context of Jesus' life. Before he died, he lived under Moses' law. He lived as a human being, fully God, fully man. He was God's only begotten son. When he died, he said, it is finished. Whatever Jesus came to do, he said, it is done. It is finished. Nothing more to do except proclaim it. Paul says that when Jesus died, Jesus took all humanity into himself. We died with him. We died with him and we rose again with him. None of this happened subject to any choice you make today. I repeat, none of this happened subject to any choice you make today. That's the gospel. That's good news. I can only be grateful to the great teacher, Michael Lilborn Williams, for teaching the little that I know about the gospel. I wish I knew more, but I'm grateful for the little I know. I can truly look at each of my fellow human beings now and can see the best in him, or her, or they. to be totally politically correct. I'm so grateful to be free of Christianity. I was knee deep in it, but then one day I heard Michael preach the gospel. I am so free now, and you too, my friend, are free. And you will know it when you hear the gospel. Your depth of understanding of this gospel is totally up to you. The scriptures, the law, the Psalms, the prophets are a rich hunting ground of truth. Just when you think you know a little bit, the fractal nature of the gospel opens up a whole new vista. It's fun and it's exciting. There's a reason that Michael and Daniel laugh so much when doing their podcasts and studies. They truly do enjoy themselves. And it's not that they make a lot of money doing this. In fact, if you knew what they earn from offerings, you'd be shocked. But more on that later. For now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and Bible teacher, Michael Lilborn Williams, from the Secret City in Tennessee. Take it away, Michael.
Good evening, gospel revolutionaries around the whole world. You have tuned into the Calgary Grace Conference for the fall of 2022. Is that right? How did that happen? Well, here we are. Thank you so much for attending the conference with us. Once again, for the same reasons, we are doing a video conference once again. We had to go ahead and make a decision as to how this was going to be, and the rules are changing. It seems to be almost daily, and where the safety and everything is concerned, for people to be traveling in the rules for travel. To let you know, I was recently not only diagnosed with COVID, but recently also recovered from COVID. It's a nasty thing, folks. This was no funner for me, and fever, chills. Goodness gracious. A lot of times I couldn't tell you whether it was 7:30 in the morning or 7:30 in the evening. I think that's kind of normal for me, though. At least I had something to blame it on now. But it was a tough time. I'm grateful for the treatment that I was able to get and all of the good advice from other people in my life, along with my doctor. And through the process of that, I was able to recover from that. Now, the reason I'm actually telling you that is because as of the time of the beginning of our conference here, I have still been experiencing what is been associated with the aftermath of COVID, which is called brain fog. Now, I could just blame brain fog for all of my things that I misstep as I record my shows all the time, but I'm not going to be able to blame it on COVID all the time. So, but that has been just a very strange thing for me. I'll start to say a word. I know exactly what I want to say. It's like the gear that turns here and then the gear that turns here. Somehow it skips. I can't really explain exactly how that happens. But for those of you that have experienced that, you know what I'm talking about. They tell me it's temporary. And so we're going with temporary, right? Right. We like temporary when it comes to recovery. So that's been a recent experience. And so I certainly didn't want to put myself or anyone else in a position to where that anyone was going to have to endure this thing. Goodness, it's nasty stuff. And I think this is not even the bad one, or whichever one is. I don't know. I've lost track of everything. Maybe you have too. Maybe it's best that we just lose track of it and just go on and live. Anyway, we are now into the Canada conference, and I'm very grateful to be feeling well, even though, as I said, I do have some things that are residual effects that a lot of people have had that have contracted COVID. So that being said, we are going into this conference with some magnificent material. And we want to bring to focus a subject that has really been intriguing me for quite some time. And so we've been studying into it, delving into it, backing up, and then delving into it again. Some of you may have heard some references to it during some of the other PowerCast and also the Tuesday night sessions that I've done here or that Daniel has done. And it just has become very intriguing to me about the invisible world. And is there one? What has attracted me, of course, has been our ultimate conclusion of the gospel. And I do think that this is an ultimate conclusion of the gospel, and that is that we are God in the earth. Now, as you have noticed, as we begin to learn things, we have to kind of learn the vocabulary that best describes what we're trying to say. I've had plenty of missteps with that, and thankfully I get challenged on it. And what that does is helps me to be able to come to a clearer understanding, sometimes not a clearer understanding, but a clearer way to say what it is that I'm understanding. And sometimes it is a clearer understanding. As you guys know, around here in the Gospel Revolution, being wrong is not something we dread. Kind of look forward to it. Now, I know that already puts us on the weird side. That is not a side effect of COVID. That's a side effect of the Gospel Revolution, to where you just absolutely are in pursuit of the truth, and who it proves right and who it proves wrong is absolutely irrelevant. The process of this, even as we have done our last two conferences, I think have helped us to understand this better, as we did a couple of conferences ago of understanding the first cosmos being destroyed and a whole new cosmos being created. And then our last conference, which was titled Who and What I Am Not. So within the context of that, it really provoked a lot of insight and more questions. Seems like everything we do, we have an answer to something, or an insight, I should say, to something. And all it does is create 10 more questions. So it doesn't look like we're going to be running out of material anytime real soon. So, but this has become a very powerful thing. And then many of you who have been tracking along with us on Facebook know that for a period of time, it became a point of contention, actually. And we answered all the questions that we could. And when we realized that at least one of the persons involved was not looking for an answer to his questions, because he simply was not responding to anything that, whether it's me or Daniel or whoever was responding to him, he wasn't responding to what we were giving back as far as trying to answer his questions, which I think we did a good job of that. But those were being ignored completely and just kind of kept on a rant. Our Facebook page is not a place for people to grandstand, even me. Our Facebook page is a place for people to exchange ideas, to talk about things. But when you start insulting people, then it's like, no, this is not good for anybody. Even the person doing the insulting, we feel like that we are saving them time. Because it just gets to the point to where that, nobody wants to hear it anymore. But the subject matter was worthy of the questions. What does it mean when you say we are God in the earth? Now, let me tell you what we are not saying. And I think that these pronouns are very important. I am not saying that I am God in the earth. I am not saying that you are God in the earth. I am saying what I believe is the only conclusion that the gospel leads to an understanding of, and that is that we are God in the earth collectively. And it's only in the collective sense that this works out as far as gospel is concerned. The powerful thing about saying we are God in the earth instead of you or I am God in the earth is that we are God in the earth gets rid of all the I's and the U's that are God in the earth. Now, we could take you back through history and show you people who have mistakenly thought they were God. We could go through Hitler. We could go through a whole list of historical figures who, because they had a God complex, they wreaked a lot of havoc around the world. Goodness gracious, that's just, we don't even want to come up with that list for you. But I think it's safe to say that many of these people, 99% of them that I know of have been men for whatever reason. But these people have come up with a God complex, if you will, with a God complex. And how do you neutralize someone that thinks they're God? The only real way to neutralize someone who has a false impression that they are God is the understanding that we are God. Get it? The way that you overcome someone with a false impression of a singularity of being God, you overcome that with the plurality of the understanding that we are God. And in that context, then, that just neutralizes them. Don't you like the thought of neutralizing Hitlers and people like that? And I think through the power of that understanding of the gospel, which is that number one is that we are one. God and we are one. There's no God out there and us down here. So we've gone in extensively to help promote the understanding that dualism we don't need dualism. We don't need dualism in our thinking. We don't need dualism in our whatever we think we might believe. But dualism is going to show up. If you want to know if something has departed from the gospel, when you start hearing people refer to God and man as two separate entities, you will know you have stumbled back into religion. As far as I can tell, only the gospel absolutely not only levels, but raises the playing field of consciousness of who we are. And as I said, not only levels, but raises the floor of our consciousness of who we are to that we are God in the earth. That way, it really does neutralize the you and the I out of this equation. Equations are important. Equations are important, especially for the world that we now live in. Why are equations, why is physics and these things important now more than at any other time in the history of the world? Because something very powerful happened, and that is going to be the subject, at least in part, of our conference this year. It is going to be talking about the invisible world and the visible world and the shadows. We found out that there is a transition. Not too long ago, a couple of months ago, we went into the term lambano. And I know you thought you was going to get by without hearing me say that in this conference, but no luck. So we found out that lambano is that helped to neutralize, if you will, that Christian word receive, that you must receive. Now, I was very thrilled that we had found the definition of that and we were able to neutralize the implication that you must receive to have. I was thrilled by it. We had some folks that weren't so thrilled by it because, and I understand why, because of the stigma that was going along in their minds and their hearts, and rightfully so, of the word receive. But the thing of it is, we couldn't take the word out of the Bible. It was there. And so what do we do in the gospel revolution? We don't change our vocabulary to because of the way Christians have distorted an understanding. We are reclaiming the vocabulary of the Bible and or of the scriptures, also the Hebrew scriptures. The only thing that's scriptures in the Bible is the Hebrew scriptures. Now you're mad at me and don't want to listen anymore. That is an absolute truth. There is only one thing that is scriptures in the entire thing that we call the Bible. The only thing in it is the Hebrew scriptures. And I'll let Daniel explain all that to you. I know he'd love to do it. In fact, we got a whole lot of GRs that could explain that to you. And it's been a fabulous stabilizing point for us when it comes to looking for what we want, and we want to understand the truth. We want to understand the truth of the gospel. Now, we've avoided every other subject on the face of the earth. You guys know we avoid politics like the plague. We avoid other controversial things, and I've had people call me and say, but Mike, this is the truth. Well, it may be the truth about that subject, but it's not the truth of the gospel. So we stay away from all of those things because we want as many people to hear the gospel as that would agree with me or disagree with me. I'm not looking to try to promote an opinion that I have about other subjects, except those things that would directly affect the understanding of the gospel. We're going to be touching on things like the speed of light. You'd say, well, what does that have to do with the gospel? It has a lot to do with the gospel because the speed of light, which is a theory, let me reassure you, we never are going to question settled science. The speed of light and super relativity is not settled science. Now, people have come up with what they call settled science out of a theory, which is kind of funny, don't you think? But it is a gospel issue because of Genesis, and God said, let there be light. Light is, it's kind of primary in the gospel. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the light, and the light and the life. And so that's what makes this issue of light a gospel issue. We're not going to go into it tonight. We're just going to let you know that this is a theory. Let me tell you what you need to do with theories. You need to question them. You need to question everything, actually. But especially when something is being taught as settled science, when you will not find any place that says that that is settled science. It is strictly a theory. There's another theory out there that whether we'll deal with it in this one or not, but I think it's it's called the theory of evolution. There's big questions about the theory of evolution, and I have a lot of questions about it, and I think a lot of you do also, but I don't have a dog in the fight. But I do want to understand it in the clarity of the light of the Hebrew scriptures. Now, a lot of people have the misconception that somehow science and the Hebrew scriptures are not congruent. all settled science, and even when you say settled science, you got to understand that the term science itself means this is what we understand to this point. That's what science means. When you're dealing with a scientific theory, it means it's just someone's idea about a possibility of the way things could be. And so the job of any theory, or the only thing that we can do with a theory or a thesis, number one, they don't have to prove it, because a theory or a thesis can't be proven, but it can be disproven. And would we dare do such a thing? Hey, folks, I've went and turned 70, so my daring seems to have gone up a bit. I'm just a little bit more daring than I used to be. And some of you say, oh my God, what are we going to do with this man now? I don't know what to do with myself, so I'll let you figure all of that out. So there's a lot of things that we're going to be touching on as we proceed through this, and I think they're important issues, and we're wanting to hear back from you about the things we may be presenting to you about some of these things, especially these two theories. A theory is a theory. That's the only thing that we are wanting to emphasize here, is that a theory is a theory, and yes, these two theories are connected to the truth of the gospel and the truth of the Hebrew scriptures. So we obviously have some questions. We're not going to be asking them tonight. Maybe you'd like to send in some questions that you might have about that, and it'll give us a little bit better view of what to do. Seeing that we have come to the settled issue of that the only real conclusion of the gospel of grace and the gospel of peace is that we are God in the earth. Now, what that does by taking us into that realm and into that reality that we are God in the earth as a result of understanding gospel truth, one thing that it takes us away from, which I've shared with you guys many times, and we're not trying to drag you to where I am, but I can tell you that the gospel has taken me to an arena that is absent of personal faith. It's absent of personal belief. It's also absent of personal hope. Now, the first thing you might say is, Mike, why is your position in the gospel now absent of personal faith, personal belief, and personal hope? Because everything that I've been able to gather about those three subjects is that they are the elements that fulfilled all things at the cross in Christ. As Paul said, why does a man hope for that which he already sees? We'll be going into Hebrews chapter 11. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for. If you already have the substance, what do you need the faith for? If you already have what was hoped for, why are you still hoping for what you already have? So the culmination of the gospel that we've been sharing with you has, as I said, led to this powerful statement, we are God in the earth. Now, where does that deliver us into? Now, here's the wonderful thing about all of this, for me at least, and that is the fact that the gospel and the conclusion that we are God in the earth, it leads to the fact that faith, hope, and belief are representative of an invisible world. Let me say that again. Now, we're going to be reading some in the text here in Hebrews that will bring this into focus a whole lot better. And we're going all the way back to Genesis. We may not get you back to Genesis tonight, but before we're finished with all this, we're going to be going into detail about the story and about the creation in the book of Genesis. It's kind of where you find it, is in the book of Genesis. So faith, hope, and belief, for me, became representative of an invisible world. And the fact that the realm of possibilities and chance, they are all associated with a visible world. Now, what has happened? Does an invisible world run alongside the visible world? I think you can already see we're diving in here. So you are hardly going to see a movie that does not portray that there's an invisible world running simultaneously next to the visible world that we have. Quantum mechanics. I was recently showing Daniel, remember the old video that I introduced you guys called What the Bleep? And it had so many wonderful finished things about the work of the cross in it. But in the process of trying to explain this, they felt that they had to introduce what is called quantum physics or quantum mechanics. Now, let me tell you that is our third subject. That is a theory. Quantum mechanics is a theory. Anyone that tries to lead you to believe that all scientists embrace this quantum mechanics or quantum theory, they're misleading you drastically. In fact, it's going to be the smaller group of what would be called scientists that would even agree that this quantum theory even is substantiated at all. And even those who teach quantum mechanics realize that it runs to a point to where that it is, there's no answer anymore. It's just, so we've brought up three theories that during the process of this conference that we'll probably be making notes on, or at least bringing up. But what they did in this, and it was very interesting after all this, because I haven't listened to it since back in the Edmonton, Alberta days when with Rowan and Diane Raphael, when I first saw this and introduced it to others. And we saw a lot of people who moved, that was part of their understanding that moved them away from what I teach today as the gospel. And it was because of this invisible world persuasion. Now, what's happened to me is I've moved just the opposite way, that I think that the invisible world is something that was completely resolved into the visible world. Everything that was invisible has now become visible. Kind of telling you the story before the teaching, but I've done that once or twice before also. But my persuasion of this from that point began to slant much more toward the understanding of the visible, and it seems that a lot of people from that time began to slant much more toward the invisible. I have become more and more convinced that the visible is the results of the invisible having been made visible. Now, oddly enough, that's not just an opinion. We have things to back that up. The teacher of the book of Hebrews, the teacher of the book of Romans, and also the book of John. We can go back, like as I said, back into the book of Genesis. And all of these are very supportive of this understanding. So what we want to do is begin to understand what started out as invisible. First off, we need to establish an understanding of what was invisible and what has become visible now. Because that is the transition point out of faith, out of belief, out of hope, into logic, into physics, into possibilities altogether. So there is a wonderful dividing line that faith, hope, and belief has delivered us out of the invisible world and delivered us into the visible, to the point to where that Paul, which will get you there, I'm going to get ahead of myself. Paul explains that the world that has appeared out of the invisible completely explains the invisible. It explains everything. Everything that is seen explains everything that was ever unseen. Whoa. Now that's a mouthful of understanding. It's not me that came up with that idea. I would like to pat myself on the back and tell you that I came up with this wonderful equation as to how that everything that is seen came out of the invisible, and that everything that is seen now explains everything that was invisible. Now, I've been talking for 30 minutes. I'll just shut this down and say you're going to have to wait until tomorrow because you've heard some really intriguing things. And some things that are, in my view at least, they are very powerful. So let's start out here in Hebrews chapter 1. And we're going to try to stay, we most likely are going to stay here in Hebrews and see what this book has to say. Now, let me encourage you. I just, once again, Daniel and I both went all the way through the book of Hebrews again. And when you go back through the book of Hebrews and you're looking at the subject of the invisible world becoming visible and what that was and how it happened and why it's important, all of Hebrews is very much teaching on that subject. Now, we have other teachers that are going to go into this because what this does, as many of you know, is that Hebrews definitely goes into types and shadows. What creates a shadow? You've got to have light to have a shadow. You have to have darkness to have the invisible. And what Hebrews does is takes us through all of these elements of the book of, not just the book of Hebrews, but of the Hebrew scriptures. All of the book of Hebrews are teachings. There are teachings in the book of Hebrews that all are reflective of the elements of the Hebrew scriptures. So what they do in presenting these shadows, and we've called them for many years types and shadows, allegories, different comments that we've been able to use to describe these. But you see, all of these things now, they're no longer shadows. You're not there anymore. We've come into something so much more powerful, and that's what we want you to know about. Because the issue is you understanding who you are. It is vitally important. Everybody talks about it. Everybody talks about who you really are. But the conclusion for most of them is not and never will be that we are God in the earth. That's not going to be their conclusion. But that is the conclusion of our understanding of the gospel here in the gospel revolution. So starting out here in Hebrews, before I get too far off my track here, just Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 and 2 gives us a real good indicator about the things that have been made and the things that have become seen, if you will. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. God, who at sundry times in diverse manners in times past spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds. So we find out here at the very first part of Hebrews several very powerful directives for our understanding. Number one, that we understand that that Jesus, the Son of God, was appointed heir of everything. He is the inheritor of all. One of his number one inheritances, or I think it's probably his number one inheritance, is you. It's the world. That is what the Hebrew scriptures prophesied, that God would give him the heathen of the world for an inheritance. It's like, man, I'd rather have something else. But you see, we're all the time talking about our inheritance, but the thing that is powerful about the gospel is that we learn through the scriptures that humanity became Christ's inheritance from his Father. That was their agreement, was let's do this, and the totality of this is that you will inherit every human being from now forward. We're born into this act that took place 2,000 years ago is so very powerful. But we have the privilege of being born into this. There were people that were actually alive when this transition took place. Just because we were not there when the transition took place does not minimize who and what we are. It just means we have been born into it. Lady Gaga is our prophetess. Baby, you were born this way. I hope that you take my levity as levity. But it's okay if you don't. We'll take Lady Gaga any day over a whole lot of other prophetesses. But not only have we learned that Jesus is the heir of all things, but it says here, according to the writer of Hebrews, which we've confirmed and affirmed that Apollos was the writer of this book. And boy, do we have some other things to share with you along those lines about just the book of Hebrews itself. We are going to get into that at another time. So the other thing that we have here is that it was by him that he made the worlds. And this is plural here. I haven't looked to see whether the word world is plural in the translation or not. But we know that he made all things. Other places say that all things were made by him. And not without him was not anything made that was made. So we don't have to get into the minutia of whether this is plural or singular, or exactly which word world it is even, because we know that all things were created by him, as we've been given to understand. And so we have those two major points, that he is the heir of all things, and it is by him that all the worlds, everything was created. And we learn two other things here that are vitally important to holding true north, if you will, to your learning experience. Folks, we've got people out there that, they are cast to the wind with their learning experience because they do not accept the teachers of people like the teachers of Hebrews. They do not accept Paul's directives about how to study, what is scripture, what is not scripture. And when you don't do that, you can just come up with just your own interpretation, which you're not going to be shocked, always comes out of an invisible world. The one thing that I'm very, very grateful for and thankful for about the Gospel Revolution is that everything that we teach comes out of the now visible world. We don't teach about it some super spooky spiritual world. In fact, every one of you that have learned the gospel in this manner, you have become less spooky and less spiritual. And the more gospel you've learned, the less you have been attracted to or even think about an invisible world. Is that a true statement? I'm just asking you guys. I think that's a true statement. I know for me, it's done that. I know in talking with Daniel and others, that the more that we have learned about the gospel, the less even attracted we are to anything about an invisible world. Because the power of the gospel is, as you're going to see here through these teachings, the power of the gospel is found in the fact that the invisible is no longer invisible. It has actually become visible. But here, as we learn from the writer of Hebrews, we're really learning how to study. We're really learning from him. How do you learn that Jesus made all things? How do you learn that that he is the heir of all things? How do you learn that? Is there a mechanism by which you learn that? I think that's laid out in the first part of chapter 1 and verse 1 and the first part of verse 2. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. Now, when you hear someone say that they believe what Jesus said, but they don't believe what Moses said, you've just found somebody that's lost a major screw to their brain. I can't even imagine that someone would embrace that thought with any gravity of thinking that it even might possibly be true. That you can listen to Jesus, but you can't listen to Moses. And my goodness, they've laid this out in great detail. They've even written an entire Bible about how that Moses got it all wrong. And that's called Mirror Bible. That's what you will find in Mirror Bible, is that Moses got it all wrong. In fact, everybody in the Old Testament got it all wrong, except in the places that they find something that agrees with their doctrine. Now, we have nothing against these people. But folks, Paul said it's an absolute shame that there is not a one of you who are able to judge a teaching as to whether or not it is correct or not. And in fact, the writer of this book is addressing persons and telling them, by now you ought to be teachers. But you're still out there talking about faith toward God. You're still out there talking about baptism. You're still out there talking about people raising from the dead. You're still out there talking about all of these things. And and the very same writer challenged their ability to even teach, because they still considered that faith toward God was important. That's what this writer says in chapter 6. Think about that. Now, we've just told you that the understanding that we've taught in the Gospel Revolution and we've received and we're passing on to you is that faith, our personal faith to us, is something that has slipped off the map. But the very writer of the book of Hebrews says, you don't know how to teach if you're still teaching about faith toward God. Oh, here I go preaching again. But I'm going to say it again because it's say-againable. And that's not COVID coming up with that word. It's truly sayable againable. And that is, if you are still teaching people to have faith toward God, you should not be teaching. Zip. Now, I want you to stop and think about how many people you know that are teaching about faith, and that faith is still a relevant part of our relationship with God as being God in the earth. And stop and think about it just a minute. How many people are teaching on faith out there? The writer of Hebrews says if you're teaching about faith toward God, you shouldn't be teaching. Yeah, I'm deliberately letting that sink in for a little while because it's like, that's pretty wild. If you are listening to someone who is teaching you how to have faith in God or toward God or faith about God, that you should not, those people, you can listen to whoever you want to, but the directive from the writer of Hebrews is that you shouldn't be teaching if you're teaching that. You shouldn't be teaching. In fact, he touched on 6 points. You ought to go over and look at them, turn to chapter 6 and read through them. Anybody that's teaching on those subjects as applicable today should not be teaching. Oh, well, now, you know, my brother Mike, resurrection is coming up. You shouldn't be teaching at all. If you're teaching that all those people that's buried in the cemetery, day's coming, and all them graves going to open up, and they're going to come rising up out of the ground, you shouldn't be teaching, because you've missed the gospel altogether. Not in part, but all together. These are very powerful subjects. Like I said, I would suggest you go there and look at them. But as we go into this conference, I want you to clearly grasp that the equivalency that the writer of Hebrews and all of Paul's writings places, and not just them, but Jesus also placed an equivalency on what he had to say with what Moses and the prophets had to say. In fact, Jesus is the one that says that if you don't believe Moses, it's impossible for you to believe me. Now, we have people out there openly bragging that they don't believe what Moses had to say was the truth. Well, just go ahead and openly brag that you don't believe what Jesus had to say either, because you might as well. Because by saying that you do not believe what Moses had to say was the truth and inspired by God, you're the same as saying that Jesus Christ himself was spouting out a bunch of garbage also. Now, it was not me who put this equivalency there. The writer of the book of Hebrews has placed this equivalency here. And he says the very same way that God spoke to us at this time, to them, by Moses, by the prophets, and by the prophets has spoken unto them, that he's also in these last days, which that, let's bring up another term. If somebody's teaching you that the last days are still yet to come, you shouldn't be teaching at all. Folks, the things that the gospel delivers us from, to have to even try to entertain this whole invisible world that's still lurking out there for Christians. Oh my God. No wonder there's such mental illness and despair and things going on in people's lives. Because when you have an invisible world that's running right alongside the visible world, and you're trying to reconcile those things, folks, you're trapped in a world full of mental illness, confusion, depression, sorrow. Now, I'm not here to tell you that just because of your confusion about these things is the only reason for somebody to be depressed. But I can guarantee you that if these things are unresolved in you, you are dealing with these things. It's a very powerful thing to know. We need to understand that the gospel is the power of God. The gospel is simply and only, but powerfully, just a story, but it is also very powerfully the story. It's God's testimony. And Paul tried so hard to get us to lambano this. I got it in again. Paul tried so hard, and Apollos, they both tried to get us to lambano, to embrace what we had already received as a result of the work of the cross. And if you are still dealing with an invisible world, and I know you say, oh, but what about demons, Mike? What about angels? What about this? What about that? What about? We'll get to them, and you may have to be satisfied with the answer, I don't know. But we are going to tell you what we do find. But we're not going to speculate and leave your mind, your poor mind, as my poor mind was, so divided on these issues. And I've talked to several people and asked them, and now, if what we are embracing here about the gospel is that this invisible world has become visible now, there's not an invisible world out there. What does it do? Do you know, I've not had anyone respond to me in anything other than extremely favorable. It's like taking a big, deep breath of air after being held underwater for years. Well, let's take that back to 5 minutes, because I'd be gone if I was under 5 minutes. Anyway, but the division of this in the brain is causing a lot of major dysfunction, not just in here, but between here and here, between people. We are absolutely convinced that the scriptures teach that the gospel will lead to a condition called they shall study war no more. That means something's got to happen in here, folks. That means that it doesn't mean just, we're all just going to drop our opinions. It's going to be that something is such a powerful understanding is going to rise that you're not going to be able to go to war anymore. And that's the gospel that says we are God in the earth, that keeps individuals from thinking they are God. Because the power of the gospel equalizes their mental illness to where it has no power over them, or especially the people who would listen to them. Just think of all the people. If we could have just as a bulk of the population been able to say, we know you don't have it right. We know you're not all that in a bag of chips, because we're all God in the earth. That can't put you in an elevated place above us. It doesn't put you in a place less than us, but you kind of get neutralized here, dude, because we are God in the earth. So as Hebrews introduces this to us, please understand that as much as Jesus spoke to us, and not in the last days, it's coming up here, because that's not a teaching that is out of here. The last days were prophesied, and the last days were the days that led up to the cross, when God was speaking to us physically through Jesus. And so we've been told here by the writer of Hebrews to take into consideration this powerful fact. Now, I want to continue on this subject of faith just a minute here before we close out this first session. And we're going to go into Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for. So faith is not what it used to be. Faith has become substance. Faith has produced something that is now seen. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for. So there we have two words that have just bit the dust as far as understanding the gospel is concerned. Your faith and your hope in God has nothing to do with the power of the gospel. Has nothing to do with the power of you understanding the gospel. In fact, your personal faith and your hope and your belief can only take away from the power of the gospel that can work in your own mind. Because now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Whatever needed to be seen has been brought into full view. This is not about you believing for a Cadillac. Come on. Even Creflo Dollar said that's crazy. Even Benny Hinn said that's crazy. This is not about you manifesting your dreams off your dream board. Come on, folks. Grow up. Grow up into the understanding of the gospel and stop making this all about me, 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 me. This is about we. And it is in the context of we that individually we become very aware of who we are. But it's only in the context of we. And even our Constitution, we the people, that's the power of it. God knows we've been having to learn that over and over and over and over again over these last 300 years. And maybe someday we'll get it. I don't know, but seems like we're headed in a better direction. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We have been brought out of that realm of the invisible. Everything that was invisible has now been seen. And we're going to take you in places, folks. I could really just take you from right there and read all the way through Hebrews chapter 11. But to cap this off in just the last few minutes of this session, I want you to turn to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 26. Boy, it's so hard for me to start. Let's start with 24. This is what you have come to. You've come to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. Now, there's people out there who tell you there's no such thing as a new covenant, because of the original work of God in Adam. Folks, you have to deny not just everything in the Hebrew scriptures, but you have to deny everything that the writer of Hebrews had to say and everything that Paul had to say. You even had to deny everything that Peter, James, and John had to say to embrace a thought that Adam was the original and perfect design of God. Even Paul taught about it and said he was created subject to vanity. It says, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling. Oh, there's that word blood. Oh, we don't like that. No. God couldn't have anything to do with blood. Get over it. Blood's a part of human life. Blood is a part of living and dying in many cases, and death is a part of living. Oh, I just don't believe that God's son would have to die. Everybody has to die. This doesn't accomplish anything. Everybody has to die. The question is, does it accomplish anything? And what many of our fellows out there teaching in the realm of mysticism are saying that Jesus' death meant no different than mine or yours or grandpa's or grandma's or anybody else's. Can't go there with them. He says, the blood of sprinkling speaketh of better things than that of Abel. So you see, he is linking this all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, verse 10, about the blood of Abel, because the blood of Abel called out for vengeance. but the blood of Jesus does not call out for vengeance. If you go back here, it talks about this fiery indignation that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake about. It says, see that you refuse not him that speaketh, for if they escape not who refused him that speaketh on earth, much more shall not we escape if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven. And all the writer of Hebrews is doing is making this clear to us. Verse 26, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he hath promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things which are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. So we're not only talking to you about everything that was invisible that has become visible, but everything that was visible that wasn't needed anymore has been shaken so hard it's just fallen apart. That was a whole lot of shaking going on. So I guess we have to expand our conference to the invisible, the visible, the shadows, and the shaken. Folks, the power of the gospel is there for your mind. It's there for your brain. It's there for mine. And there's something so incredibly powerful about the transition of what happened at the cross. It's something very powerful about relying on the Hebrew scriptures to help us understand accurately what happened at the cross. Not to be dismissive about what happened at the cross. In fact, quite the opposite. You say, when are you going to leave these guys alone? Mike, never. Just never going to leave them alone. They deserve to know. They deserve to be able to walk away from that confusing world. I've listened to most of them, and goodness, there's some of them you actually hear the anguish in their voice about the things that are just about to happen. It's just about to get here. It's just about to get around. Oh, it's just around the corner. Oh, can't you wait? Just wait. You can hear it. You can feel it. It's going to happen. And when that never happens, that leads to a loss of hope. And a loss of hope, the loss of hope leads to absolute despair. And you say, well, what should they do not to lose hope? Stop trying to live by hope. Why do you hope for what you already have? The only thing people can tell you about hope is to try to get something that you don't have. When I teach the gospel, I can't find a thing that you were not given through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So why would I teach you how to have faith, belief, and hope? Because faith has become the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
You wouldn't know it, but I'm a Dutchman. And we have an expression in Holland that goes like, voor niks gaat de zon op, which roughly translated means no freebies on this planet except the sun coming up every morning. Well, and Mike Williams Ministries are no exception. Mike has expenses. This conference, we are saving a lot of money on airfare, meals, and accommodations. But Mike does have a small staff, and they are a huge reason for his success. If you go to the website, you'll see the professionalism there. And listening to the weekly Bible study and the weekly podcast, I am so impressed with the quality of the productions. But don't feel any compulsion. In other words, if you can't give, don't give. But if you can, be as generous as you can. For those living in Canada, Make your checks payable to Grace Conferences, and we will issue, as we always do every year, issue you a tax-deductible receipt at the year end. If you want to use Visa, we can do that as well. Visa or MasterCard. We ask that you call me, and then I can take your information over the phone. My phone number here in Calgary is area code 403-686-0841. And I will take your card number and info. And by the way, this info is immediately destroyed after processing. We do not keep it on file. Make sure either way to leave me your address for mailing the tax receipt at the year end. For our American donors, you're best off to go to Mike's website, gospelrevolution.com, and click on the donate button. Thank you very much for supporting Mike Williams Ministries and Grace Conferences. Again, if you're a Canadian donor, make your check payable to Grace Conferences. For the Americans, go to the website and click on the donate button. For Grace Conferences, I don't know if I didn't give you my address, so I'll give it to you now. It's care of Suite 400, 7015, McLeod Trail, South, Calgary, Alberta, T2H 2K6. So please put your checks in there, along with your return address for that donation receipt. I'll repeat the address one more time. Suite 400, 7015, McLeod Trail South, Calgary, Alberta, T2H 2K6. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.